If you ask any person who's on their deathbed, what is the most valuable resource? They will almost always say it is time. Maybe work isn't 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Maybe work is meant to be something less than that. Maybe work is not to be tied to one employer. Maybe work is to be done where you have skills that are unique to you and you can plug in flexibly and creatively. I think that's where we need to go. That's the future of work.
Generative AI is transforming life as we know it, not just in the workplace, but in governance, ethics, and beyond. Here at the AI Lab, we're dissecting all of this to help you make sense of it. I'm Melissa Mahtani, your host of this episode, and today we're taking a look at AI adoption around the world with the CEO of Andela, Carrol Chang. Carrol, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So for people who aren't familiar, Andela is a platform to hire AI engineers and upskill teams around the world. And Carrol, you've been there now for about 18 months. You joined, I think, in September 2024. Before that, you were at Uber as the global head of driver operations. So you have really had a front row seat to how AI is transforming the global gig economy. What have you seen in this space?
I think we're seeing fundamental shifts in how work is organized. When you talk about Uber and what I saw there, Uber is the company that created the so-called gig economy. So, kind of breaking the notion that work has to be done via an employer, via a 5-day a week, 40-hour-a-week job, and allowing people to freelance and to say that they're going to work anytime, anywhere they want. And what we're seeing with AI is the potential for that same dynamic to happen, but for knowledge workers. Now, there's a lot that I saw at Uber that was done well. There was a lot that was not done well. I think there are a lot of cautionary tales and lessons learned from that. And as I see what's happening with software developers, this is a bellwether. This is the first group that is getting disrupted from knowledge work. And what is happening with developers, we are watching and shaping very closely at Andela. And I think the industry and governments and regulators have to also watch closely, because this same thing is going to happen to all knowledge workers as AI proliferates.
I'm so interested to get into the governance side of it. But first, Andela dubs itself as the human layer of AI. What does this mean?
Well, you have this growing gap between the technology that is coming out at a breakneck pace from the AI labs. So you've got OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, et cetera. And it's really hard to keep up with how fast the technology is evolving. And it's hard to keep up, but it's exhilarating. So if you stay and you follow the frontier, like every month, every week, it seems like there are these significant advancements in the model's capabilities. And these models, their ability to code and to essentially do a lot of the work that the junior software developer has traditionally been relied on to do, is spectacular. And so now you have a lot of software development being done through agentic programming, where people don't need to write a single line of their code. Some people go so far to say that they don't even need to look at a single line of their code anymore. I think that that's probably a little bit advanced for where the industry is right now, but it probably is where the industry is going. And so this is revolutionary. I mean, this is completely upending the job of the developer. And so you shift the kinds of skills that you require from folks. And at Andela, what we are seeing is that there is that breakneck speed at which technology is advancing and coming from the labs. And then you have everyday companies and technology teams that cannot keep up at that pace. And there's real reasons for this. There are security, compliance, government systems, there are procurement processes in place. And what companies need to actually adopt AI is they need a partner that is going to help them with that transformation. They need this human layer that is going to help them take these models and actually adapt them to their business cases. We are a partner that helps to do that. We work with Fortune 500 companies. We take the models and we tune them, and we adapt them for the specific business cases that enterprises have. And we do it in a private and a secure environment. And we also help technology teams upskill their own workforce, especially software developers, so that they can become fluent in using AI.
And as you said, software developers are a bellwether for what we're going to see across all industries. So many conversations about what's going to happen and about governance in general are taking place in Washington, D.C., as opposed to Lagos, Nairobi, Manila, other places around the world where Andela works and where, from your experience at Uber, you've seen the effect that technology and the gig economy has. What kind of impact is this going to have if all the decisions are being made in DC without enough thought for the tentacles they have globally?
AI is certainly a global technology that is going to have a global reach and global disruption in the labor force worldwide. This is not a United States phenomenon. And certainly I see that from the perch of Andela. Andela is an American company and entity, but we were a company that was started in Lagos, Nigeria. And we have over 100,000 highly skilled software developers in our network. The vast majority of these folks live in the global south. So places like sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, Latin America. And we see the life-changing impact that Andela can have when you connect a brilliant remote technologist with a remote job opportunity. Andela was founded on this premise that brilliance is everywhere in the world, but opportunity is not. And AI's potential is really, truly to reach every single corner of the world. To make it so that a brilliant developer in Cairo or Lagos or Bogota or Sao Paulo or somewhere in Romania or even in Canada or here in the United States, wherever they are, they can perform work and access economic opportunity. Because of that, because AI is going to create this ability for work and jobs to become broken into tasks, to become distributed globally around the world, I think that we have to think about labor regulation and cooperation of governments across borders.
AI was supposed to be the great equalizer. If everyone has the same tools, they should have the same opportunity, but it's actually creating more inequality. I know you recently came back from Kenya. You were at an Africa Tech conference. What are you seeing in terms of inequality and AI around the world?
We have a very high concentration of chatter and technology coming out of Silicon Valley in the United States. And there's this perception that the most brilliant minds are there, and that really the center of the universe, right, in AI is in Silicon Valley in the United States. And there's some truth to that. But in order for people around the world to be able to actually access the benefits of this technology, there is a lot of infrastructure that has to be built. There's actual literal electricity, right, and energy that has to reach people around the world. And that's a pre-AI issue. And that requires governments and utilities, right, to make sure that people have access to electricity, to broadband, et cetera. But then there's the AI infrastructure, so data centers. And, if there is no compute on the continent, right, of Africa or in the global south, then it's going to be really hard for people to actually access the speed and the innovation that's coming out in the frontier models. And so there are also issues of equity there. And if the AI labs and the big infrastructure companies who are, creating large compute centers and data centers around the world, if they really care about equitable access to this technology, they will work with governments to make sure that compute, power, data centers, and basic utilities are accessible to everywhere, no matter where they are around the world.
When you are in Silicon Valley having these conversations, what is some of the biggest misconceptions executives here have about AI globally?
I think the number one misconception that executives have about AI is that this is mostly a technology problem. It is not. The technology is spectacular. It is life-changing. It is going to upend knowledge work. All of that is true. But the important thing to realize is that the core technology and the foundation models, they're ready. And the part that is not ready is the organizational culture and change management. And, whenever we work with an enterprise client on your AI strategy and your AI implementation plan, yes, we're initially talking about technology, but I think what the savviest leaders realize is that this is like 60, 70% a people and a culture challenge. And so what that means is teaching people about change management. And how do leaders first recognize how they themselves are going through a change curve and a grief journey? And how do they get themselves through that so that they can get themselves ready to lead all their teams through that same journey? And then how do you make sure that the executive team is synchronized and that you can do that, right, hands held together to go out to the company with an aligned ethos and plan. And that is not technology. That is management and leadership and really understanding how to implement change. And I think that in this age of AI, where this is the greatest technological breakthrough of our lifetimes, I think ironically, the companies that win are going to be the ones that get the human side right. That is people, org, change management.
That is such a good point. Talking about inequality, it's not just globally. We know there's a gender gap in AI, and it's not just bias in the machine, but less women are using AI, less women are training it, and this obviously has a knock on effect. Why do you think this is? And is the industry paying enough attention to it?
One of the common themes we see with AI is that the AI will be biased if the data that went into it was biased. And the data that goes into it will be biased if your sources are not representative of the general population. And so it is important to have people with linguistic diversity, gender diversity, right? But just you want your data set to represent the population that the AI is going to be representing. And so I think with women, with people with different linguistic diversity and skills, I think that AI has to be trained on different accents, on different types of languages in order for it to truly be representative of the global population. But I think that there is another element of gender inequality and diversity that I think about with AI. It's actually about the impact on the macroeconomy and the labor markets overall. I think about that a lot because AI is going to displace and replace a lot of knowledge work that is done today, which means that there are whole professions like software development, a whole bunch of STEM fields, and even professional services like law and consulting that are going to end up, being radically transformed by AI. But then there are other fields that really won't. And if they are, maybe this is like decades, lifetimes away. And these are fields like nursing, early childhood education, senior care, social work, mental health services, police work, detective work, investigations. A lot of this work requires human to human interaction. And that is very, very difficult to replace with AI. Again, certainly not now, maybe not ever. And so many of the jobs and professions that I just named are dominated by women. And so we have an opportunity with AI to say that as a lot of the current knowledge work professions are replaced, we might take a bunch of the human capital that now can be reallocated and repurposed. And why don't we redirect that attention and redirect some of our economic value that we are assigning in society to some of these professions that have historically been some of the most underpaid professions around? And if we really care about senior services, childcare services, education, healthcare, right, then why don't we pay these professions appropriately? Part of the gender wage gap actually comes down to the kinds of professions that women are in and that they dominate. And I think we have an opportunity with AI to rethink which kinds of work we consider economically valuable in society.
We are seeing a lot of job displacement, some of it as a result of AI. Sometimes it's just companies saying AI is a reason, because we've seen companies' stock go up when they announce layoffs as a result of AI. What kind of message do you think this sends when companies' stock is going up because they're laying off people to embrace this technology?
There's that famous quote, I forget who said it, but it goes that the stock market is a voting machine. And so you can't actually just make your day-to-day decisions as a CEO and as leader based on a voting machine. You've got to really think about enterprise value as a weighing machine. You've got to think about, am I actually legitimately, substantively adding value to the organization for the long term? And so I think the reason why the stock market, right, sees a value bump when companies are announcing layoffs is because the world thinks of it as, oh, AI equals replacing workers, which means that worker costs and operating expenses should go down. People should realize lots of efficiency, and so companies should be able to really downsize and yet still achieve same or greater levels of productivity. That's why, right, the stock market is valuing companies that way. But there's a bit of a hangover effect that we are seeing from companies who are pursuing the same move. If you lay off half of your software developers because of AI, then you've got to believe a few things. One is that your remaining workforce, the half that you didn't lay off, is fluent enough in AI that they have actually already achieved productivity gains that are going to make up for the half of the workforce that you just laid off. And that's itself a big assumption because workforce AI fluency in general across Fortune 500 enterprises is generally lagging and quite low. The second assumption that you have to make is that if you laid off all of those workers and you plan to hire in a whole bunch of AI fluent folks, you've got to believe that those folks exist in the job market and that you're going to be able to find them and attract them and hire them en masse. And that is another key assumption that I've not seen to be true. We are in the very early innings of AI fluency and understanding as a world. And so if you lay off 10,000 developers and you think you're going to hire back 2,000 or 5,000 who are AI fluent, you're going to have a very hard time doing that because AI fluency means a whole bunch of different things. This is one of the things we work on at Andela is trying to bring some order to this madness. What is an AI engineer, quote unquote? Are you using AI to build code? That means you're an AI augmented engineer. Or are you coding to build AI? You're actually building AI products and features and functionality. And these terms are being used interchangeably, even within those two buckets. Do you code to build AI or do you use AI to build code? Even within those buckets, there are subtypes and subarchetypes of engineers. And so people have to be precise about exactly what they want out of AI skill sets and fluency. And right now in the hiring market, I can tell you, having worked in this field, that it is very hard to find AI fluent technologists en masse. The better and simpler model that we're seeing a lot of companies go to is a make model, meaning if you know that you want to achieve this level of AI fluency in this many developers in your workforce, then go through reskilling programs, right? Figure out and find a partner that's going to help you take your existing workforce and make them better, faster, stronger with AI tools. And if you can figure out how to do that, you don't have to go through the pain of these layoffs only to find that you can't actually hire back the people who you need in the market.
It makes a lot of sense when you say it like that, but it's not what we're seeing in practice. We are seeing so many people be laid off, and it feels like there's a real crisis. When we look to the future and we think about how society is going to move forward, I know there was a Citrini report that was released in February that, suggested an AI tax as a way that governments could make money and then distribute that to the people. OpenAI released a blueprint for taxing companies and creating a sovereign wealth fund, which is a sort of similar idea. What do you think the solution is?
I think the report, the blueprint that OpenAI came out with recently is a good blueprint. It's full of good starter ideas. I think that some of them are probably really early ideas that need a lot more fleshing out. But I'll go through some of them. I think the broad takeaway from the OpenAI blueprint and the Citrini report is that huge swaths of the working population are going to be displaced from the kind of knowledge work that they are doing today. That is the headline, and that is absolutely true. We can disagree on how fast that's going to happen, but huge swaths of the knowledge workers in this world are going to eventually be displaced. And what that means is that a lot of work today that is economically productive and economically valuable is going to be done by synthetic labor, by machines, rather than human beings in the future, which means that there's a huge issue here of dollars. Because if people today find sustenance and take care of their families and put food on the table because they work knowledge work jobs from companies that give them a wage to do that. And if that work disappears because there's a bunch of layoffs happening and a lot of that work is now being done by machines, we have a big problem as society to figure out of how we're going to reallocate capital. This is not a problem that one AI company alone is going to solve. This is going to require massive coordination across government, and not just, again, with the American government, but across governments around the world. There are already corporate tax structures that exist. The OpenAI blueprint, for instance, suggests shifting taxable income from personal wages to more corporate taxes and capital gains. But those structures exist today already in the United States. And you know what American companies do? A lot of times they take their taxable income and they shift it, right, offshore. So this is not a problem that one government is going to solve alone. This technology is going to displace knowledge workers, not just in this country, but worldwide, which means that if the allocation of capital and those structures are not globally coordinated, you're just going to have people shifting their corporate tax and their capital gains elsewhere, because that has always happened in this country. And so the blueprint is a good start, but it really requires global coordination.
That is such a good point, because every company is going to try and save as much money as they can. So looking at it with that lens, what is the solution? Is there one?
I absolutely think there's a solution. We have to rethink the allocation of capital and economic value. Full stop. To date, the way that we have assigned economic value and allocated capital has generally been through someone's full-time employment through a company. And a lot of that work is knowledge work. And the capital flows from companies to workers, and then from workers, those wages are taxed and they flow back to governments, and social services are provided. In the future, if a lot of that work is not done by human workers, but is done by synthetic workers, then a lot of that tax base goes away, right? So it is a huge and existential issue for governments and for society in terms of how social services are going to be provided. I do think that we have to have different capital allocation structures. I think that rethinking tax regulations and tax rates has to be done. But again, it cannot be done by one country. It has to be some kind of global coordinated effort. The OpenAI paper mentions something like a sovereign wealth fund that actually directly makes government investments into AI, so that returns from AI can also be enjoyed and shared by the government and invested directly back into social services or in funds back to citizens. I think that's another idea that is worth exploration. There's also this idea of allocation of time. You know, if I think about like bubbling up from the Citrini report and the OpenAI blueprint, and you think about the big questions being asked of humanity, I really think it is as simple as two questions, which is, how are we as a society going to reallocate capital, which is money? And how are we as a society going to reallocate time? And if you ask any person who's on their deathbed, or any person over the age of 70 or 80, and you ask them, what is the most valuable resource? They will almost always say it is time. And there's a lesson to be learned, right, from people who've lived an entire life. And if we think about that, about the precious, scarce resource of time, then as AI replaces a lot of knowledge work and it fundamentally upends the norms that we've come to understand life to be in, the last 100 years since the Industrial Revolution, maybe work isn't 5 days a week and 8 hours a day, right? 40 hours a week. Maybe work is meant to be something less than that. Maybe work is not to be tied to one employer. Maybe work is to be done where you have skills that are unique to you, and you can plug in flexibly and creatively to bring your talents, right, to get some economic value out of that. Maybe you can participate in a marketplace. Maybe there are jobs that can be broken out into tasks, and you can do some of those tasks. Certainly, agents and synthetic labor will be doing some of those tasks, but maybe there's a way to build a dignified living and to get enough economic value out of that you can support a family. And maybe that's not 40 hours a week. Maybe it is something much less. The OpenAI paper talks about, should we pilot a 4-day-a-week work week? I think that is a good seed of an idea. And I would take it even radically farther than that to say this idea of an X-day work week is itself a vestige of how we thought about working norms since the Industrial Revolution. In fact, what if we thought about work entirely differently? What if we thought about it not as tied to, right, a specific employer, but really a worker's talents, their portfolio, their skills were something that followed them around. They were in control of it. They could decide how to deploy those talents onto tasks or jobs as they see fit. And they are able to make decisions about their economic agency and their participation in the labor economy outside of these existing norms. I think that's where we need to go. That's the future of work. So I would challenge the OpenAI thinking to go even farther than just thinking within the confines of today's labor structures.
I mean, that's a lot of structural change that you have suggested, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We have seen other countries around the world want to move to some of what you've just laid out. But the US is a country that is always standing in the way or refusing to regulate or attend any kind of global governance sessions. How can we incentivize lawmakers in the US to get on board?
If we have the largest American technology companies advocating for these kinds of changes, I think that it is very possible to get the American federal government and the American state governments to be open to these ideas.
You're the CEO of a global company, but you're also a mother. When we're talking about the future of work, when we're talking about what society could look like, are you worried about the entry level job crisis that we're seeing at the moment and what that's going to look like for your kids?
Again, I'm an optimist, so I don't have this doom and gloom thinking that when my kids are done with their schooling, notice that I didn't say when they graduate from college, because I do not know what a higher education is going to look like when my kids are done with their preliminary schooling. My oldest is 10, and so in 8 years, he will graduate from his senior year of high school. And I don't know what higher education is going to look like after that. But what I do know is that I have a very clear thesis of the kinds of skills that my kids have to develop. And if they focus on developing those skills, they're going to be okay. Those skills are service, understanding how human relationships and trust form. I think there's a second bucket of skills related to critical thinking and problem solving. And if they are able to build those two buckets of skills, relationship, trust building, and service, right, which is the human to human interaction stuff, that's EQ, right? And that's how you work with other people. And then the second bucket of skills is problem solving, critical thinking, judgment, right? Taste, I'll put in there too. If they're able to develop those two things, I'm not worried about where they're going to go.
So we've talked a lot about the doom and gloom and the job displacement, but I am also interested, bringing it back as we just close this conversation, to AI around the world. What are some of the changes that you've seen that excite you the most about the promise of AI?
The most exciting promise for me when I see generative AI is the ability to democratize learning. Personalized, instant, real-time, high-quality learning to anyone around the world at any time. If you think about the wealth inequality that exists in the world today, a lot of it cascades down from access to other opportunities that people had along the way. A lot of people who are in the best and the highest paying jobs had access to the best schools. And in order to have access to the best schools, they came from a family or some other kind of situation that gave them the ability to get to those best schools. And access to high quality education has just been something that has evaded a lot of the world. And our whole company, Andela, was founded to help close this gap. We started as a software developer training school in Lagos, Nigeria in 2014. And back then, there was no generative AI. There was no ChatGPT on study mode, right? There was no Claude, right, helping you learn individually. I have kids in grade school. And if you have not actually used these tools to help guide your kids' homework and get them through a stuck math problem, you've really got to try this, because it can just open your eyes to the potential of AI to help in learning. I am not one of those people who thinks that, oh, we've got to just sit kids in front of a screen and don't worry, teachers will be replaced. Absolutely not. I believe that children, as they are developing, they need to have human to human interaction and instruction. But when you think about the developed human mind and the ability to interact with a machine and to access high quality, personalized learning, it is tremendous. It is exciting. You think about people with learning differences, and you think about a tutor that is explicitly tailored to their specific learning style, and then the quality and the speed of their learning that they're able to unlock because of that. And you think about people, if as long as you've got internet access, which is not always a given, but as long as you do, and you have access to these kinds of tools, you could get just as high quality an education as someone who's going through the best schools, right, in a high income country. That to me is tremendously exciting. That to me is one of the most promising things about AI, because so much about access to wealth creation in this world stems from your access to education.
It really does seem like humanity is at this crossroads, and whether we're going to move towards the great promise of AI in an equal way or in a more narrow, unequal way. It's been a fascinating conversation, Carrol. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For our listeners out there, if you have thoughts on what we've been discussing, we'd love to hear from you, as well as what other topics you'd like us to dive into here on the podcast. Send your questions to me at podcastquestions@theailab.ai, and we'll try to find you some answers. Thanks for listening.